behind the room here.
I saw a related tweet today from a political pundit who made the point that if Russia had taken over Ukraine, had Zelensky ran, and Russia, as Russia assumed he would do, and had they kind of taken Kyiv in 3 days, as could have happened, uh, he was making the point that it's likely China might have made strong movements towards Taiwan at this point, and Russia would probably not have just stopped at Ukraine, having taken Ukraine. That would embolden him to do, uh, the Baltics or whatnot. So the that was a really interesting reminder that just how things we take it for granted now that Ukraine's on.
Can I just take a nuclear point for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, no, it's I was debating a lot of it on Twitter Spaces and stuff, and what we're seeing is if you look at the US's response to Russia over the nuclear warfare, it's similar to what they're doing in with Taiwan, in the sense of we're incrementally seeing a shift from strategic ambiguity, which is the prevailing approach the US has had towards Taiwan for the Taiwan Relations Act, or TAR. And basically, if you look back over the past year and a bit, Biden has increasingly mentioned what would happen if China were to do something, resulting in that 60 minutes interview with on various issues. And he said, there will be some kind of military response. That's the most explicit Biden has been on the matter. But it's not an indication exactly of what it would be, but it is insinuating to the Chinese that if you do something, we will definitely do something as well. And you're seeing this replicated in Ukraine, because Russia has made these, overt nuclear suggestions, but anyone who is going to be well aware of the American response, it's the Russians. We forget that they do have direct lines of communication, specifically concerning nuclear warfare. And, they said there could be a multitude of different responses. I was listening to Elliot Cohen, who's a professor of strategic studies at SAIS, and he was stating, you could maximize economic response. You could see a targeted strike on the facility that launched the missile. You could see a increased presence of military personnel, a maritime presence in the Black Sea. There's a multiple methods, not necessarily just targeting Russia or someone with a equivalent missile strike, like retaliatory. And if anyone knows this, it's the Russians. So sort of the likelihood that you would see a nuclear attack by Moscow is possible, but it's still very low. And the thing is, it's not like it's just going to happen. It's not a big red button you just press. Is You've got to maneuver the things into place. You've got to get the necessary protocols in place and granted. And the other thing that I think is the biggest inhibitor to this is the Chinese, the Indians, because even if they support Russia's ideologue in principle about standing up to Western hypocrisy or something, they're not going to sort of be supportive of Russia basically rendering the entire global economy useless, and Armageddon. So if anyone would probably be a massive barrier to Putin's maneuver, it would be President Xi, because the Chinese don't agree with that, even if they do have sympathy for the Russians. But it was a debate I was having with some people, and it's scary, but I think we should remain pragmatic and longer visioned at the same time. Sorry for that monologue.
So you don't think it's conceivable that Putin could have some sort of rogue element in the government that would make it as easy as pressing a button to launch a nuke? Because I don't think that that's inconceivable. I think that's a that's
Not
a likely
inconceivable.
scenario.
I think think about it, right? What does Putin want to do? He wants to reincorporate ideally all of Ukraine, or at least half of Ukraine. So why would he then bomb the place that he then has under Russian control? He then has a radioactive set of large land about the size of Belgium or Portugal in his territory, or at least on the border with his territory, which his men, neither Ukraine, can fight over. So that land becomes completely useless, uninhabitable. You can't even use it for
Yeah, but
grain
then
production.
who would mess with them afterwards?
Well,
Because he would get
quite a lot of people.
retaliation for that too. You think that he's willing to annihilate the entire world? And if he is, then he's just a lunatic.
Yeah, he's not a lunatic. He's obsessed with getting Ukraine under his control, but he's not mad. There is one interesting theory which he could target. If you remember, you guys remember Snake Island? It's this body of land that was in the Black Sea, which was supposedly where those Ukrainian defenders were killed by the ship in the first 3 weeks of the war. There is one analyst who thought maybe you could see a display strike, as it's known, on the island using a tactical nuke because no one lives there. The radiation would be somewhat contained. But I mean, why would you bother doing that? It's such a waste of time and costly as well. When the Russians don't exactly have a booming economy as it is. But anyway, I'm going to land there and yeah, I'm curious
one
about things.
one other little thought. I saw a little video that might be going viral of Jewish Ukrainian a Ukrainian-born Jewish guy soldier who's standing over the body of a Russian guy who's wearing women's socks because he had stolen them because they don't have proper supplies, so they're thieving from locals in towns that they're overtaking. And he says, so here's this Russian guy who um, is here to liberate Nazis from Ukraine, and here I am as a Jewish Ukrainian, killing this idiot for trying to denazify, you know, uh, in this bizarre, you know, situation. Here he is as a thief wearing some woman's socks as he lays dead here. It's a really amazing video that
That's crazy.
Just on
That seems
that
like
point,
straight out of the New Yorker comics.
the washing machine thing, sorry, just whilst I remember, that's actually interesting. So the reason why they're nicking washing machines and other basic appliances like that is because there's semiconductors and the very basic pieces of tech, because the sanctions have prevented them from getting it. So they're literally having to scavenge off the land to gain pieces of materials and tech to power or whatever, use in some of them their artillery and equipment, which is why you're seeing them nick all this random shit. Not because they're sort of, I mean, they are doing a hell of a load
So
of
it's
loot,
like artillery that's powered by a washing machine computer.
kind of,
the
basically.
circuit board,
They're reverse engineering, like, basically by just dismantling them and adding them into their pieces
transistors
of.
and circuit boards that they can use. Yeah,
That sounds like a crude version of the Borg.
yeah, but the Russians have been doing this for a very long time. It's like there's a really nice saying of how do you piss off a Russian grandfather is when it's the phrase that will get him more angry than anything is to say it's not worth replacing or not worth repairing when it comes to like some broken item in your house and in America like a fan breaks and we want to chuck it out rather than just pop the thing open and fix
Or
whatever.
my batteries in my remote are low on the TV. Time to get a new TV.
Well,
My dad. I used to joke about my dad being the first MacGyver. It's so as a Mexican American, he with duct tape he would fix anything. That's really funny, Tyler.
yeah,
But real quickly, if I may, Piotr, what if Putin were to do anything with a nuke? Like, what would be the blowback with the Russians, with the people, which is the common Russian people? We saw his calling of the armed reserves. We saw the exodus that kind of catalyzed. What are your insights with regards to just
Isn't there
the
conscription?
blowback?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of details about the mobilization, which I won't bore everyone with now. But basically, this was called a partial mobilization. It's not. It's a full. If you look at data that was accessed on some of their backlogs or whatever you call it, back end, it's actually more like 1 million. Um, there are calls to make it just a full general mobilization. Women are being conscripted. People being trained with 2 weeks, as I said before. But you've seen more men run away, i.e., leave the country, than you have actually seen conscripted. So the joke is, Shoigu, how many have you conscripted? 300. How many men have we got? 300,000. Oh, fantastic. Who have left the country? Oh, so it's like the army to run away is more than the army to join the fact that the war. And most people's motivation for running away is not because they they support dismantling Putin. It's because they don't want to be conscripted. So it's not a good reflection of Russians' real motivation for finally standing up and doing something. But in terms of like what you're saying, yeah, it's from data that I've seen, that would be a red line for most Russians. They don't want to see their livelihoods entirely annihilated. Putin's ratings did dip from, I think they were 80, but to get this, 80% apparently, I think the data's been manipulated, but 80% of Russians apparently still supported Putin or his approval rating that high during the whole of the war, and it dipped to like 70. But that's like it's crazy high. The number of Russians that had increased in terms of their overall desire for war to stop had gone up to an all-time high of 55%. So for once, majority of Russians, again, we have to question the validity of the data, want the war to stop in some way. But it's not clear how they want that to stop. Nuclear strike, I would think that the majority of Russian people do not want
Yeah,
because,
it's a contradictory position. They want the war to stop, but they also support Putin. Like I've seen the polls on the streets,
yeah.
and it's a weird kind of situation of the kind where the electrocution experiment from the 1960s in the U.S., where you had something like 2/3 compliance just because of, hey, here's someone telling you, I got this, don't worry, it's not your responsibility, it's mine, and then you're willing to do atrocious things. It seems to be a similar kind of repeat of human behavior.
Well, there was the video of the Russians. So I'm sure some of you maybe saw there was this. Well, after Putin signed the annexation or incorporation orders in, they held a party in the Red Square in Moscow, and there's videos of the speaker, this guy wearing a red jacket and glasses, like hurrah, and doing all these typical Russian things, and then people screaming and shaking and joyous. And then someone shared a video of people who are actually at the event. Basically, all they've done is dubbed over noises and fanfare because actually the entire event was lackluster, and all the people who were there are actually employees, states of the employees of the state anyway. So the whole thing is just Russia facading all of it. It's all the front. It's all fake. So I think Russians would probably draw a line at nuclear warfare, but it's difficult to really tell because that kind of information is very hard to get out of Russia, let alone their general positioning on the war.
I've seen exactly what you're describing there, and it's worth a look for those who aren't up to speed on that, because it's also worth noting that this very, I mean, Piotr, would you disagree? The guy has a distinctly Hitler-esque kind of vibe to him in this.
Oh, it's like yeah. It's like the way the whole thing's turned out. The flags, a lot of them got Z's on them. It's Hitler's Germany basically.
And it's clearly a staged, crafted uh, piece, and the message was very clear and he's screaming that this is a holy war, that this should be called the holy war. And I just want people to pause for 2 seconds to consider how quickly things transition from a special operation to a holy war, because those are two very different things. And now it's this idea of they need this banner to unify under. That's what the guy is saying, and he has this word, some old Russian word that he wants everyone to kind of unify under. Uh, Goida, I believe, is what it was, and he's delivering it just as Hitler would have done, and it's really wild to watch. But make note that the special operations scam bubble is officially over. And now that it's over, they must repackage what's happening. They must make a new narrative because the old narrative has been exposed as the sham that it was. And so the new narrative is it's a holy war. You get it? That's an important point to absorb.
Very important to see how their propaganda is creating an image which is far from truth. And also very important to notice there may be elements inside of Russia in retaliation to all this nonsense by Putin can rise up against him, and perhaps he would meet a very, drastic fate in return because of all the lies and propagation of this, fake special operation no longer holds up. They have expanded the time period, all the resources. None of those lies hold anymore, and the loss upon loss in the hand of Ukrainian people. Putin has to save his face. If he reaches out for any extreme action, the faction inside of Russia, they are not like blind to what's happening. And that's the third possibility I want to always go to, somebody from inside Russia taking care of Putin.
Yeah, I can go further than that in that if you think about it, the first thing that became notable about Putin's SMO or special military operation is that by designating it as such, he actively cannot therefore declare full mobilization because it's not a war. So he shot himself in the foot by doing that. Obviously, not expecting the war to go this way and therefore having to decree mobilization at all. So that's one thing. The other thing is just the whole idea that Putin is a master strategist has been debunked clearly, but more specifically that people used to think, oh, he's driven primarily by pragmatism and, you know, materialist things like, you know, he can control the geography, he has access to the Black Sea better, he has control over the potential gas reserves under Ukraine, all these sorts of things. But clearly not. He's actually very much driven by ideological and normative values, namely that he is so obsessed with this idea of greater Russia or the, you know, Novorussia and Soviet Union glory days that, you know, he's not just pragmatic. He's got this inner sort of inferiority complex that is all about making Russia this great power it once was sort of thing. And
It's a chip
it
on the
reveals
shoulder,
a lot about him as
the
a
ball.
person. Sorry,
Okay.
what was that?
He definitely has a chip on the shoulder, I think, from the Cold War, because I think that's one of the things that he's viewed. Analysts have said that he viewed it as such a great loss to Russia, and there was so much shame that the Russian people had to endure after the fall of the USSR that he felt that that was a great injustice and wanted to restore Russian people so that they feel proud once again. And so I think that's one of the main drivers.
Also, self-preservation and internal power that he was losing. He wanted to consolidate the power. He had no other choice to do that because there were rising disapproval. Although all these fake kind of approval rating are completely staged, internally he was feeling very weak and threatened. That's why that was one of the reasons, and still is, that he wants to seem very powerful.
Does anybody and have you had a discussion about why he bombed his own pipeline? Has there been any debate about that
Yes, yes,
strategy?
It
yes.
was the
Not him.
Americans.
Well, there,
Yeah.
I,
You
I'm,
have
I,
to decide it, yeah. Who bombed
it's,
that
it,
first?
it
Most of us think
violates.
it's not him.
Yeah, I made the case for why it could be the Americans. I'm not claiming that it was, but I have there's more evidence for the not evidence. There's more tangential points to to raise um, with regard to a U.S. driven campaign than for Russia to do so, or and interestingly, no one seems to have evidence that Russia did it either. Um,
But Tyler, Putin does throw away his own people just to prove a point. He has this kind of mentality, like based on the previous decision he has made. He is not afraid of throwing young adolescents into the face of war without any training, without being upfront about it, just to prove a point or to show his nation that, oh, we have lost this many soldiers here, now we have to take an action. So what are your thoughts on that? What if it's an attack just to garner more support, that, oh, look what they are doing to us, they took away our freedoms or whatever, putting sanction on us, trying to throttle our growth, and now they have taken away our pipeline. So don't you think Putin could have
He's
done
more intelligent than that.
yeah,
that? Is the intelligence I'm talking about, Cheryl, and he has
I'm
done
saying
that in
he's
the
more
past.
intelligent than that. He doesn't have motivation to do that.
You can
Sure.
just turn off the
Yeah,
They don't need to
The
bomb
flagged
it.
operations
Yeah.
people do just to
No,
create
they can just
uh,
shut it down.
support.
They don't have to bomb it.
They
It
have
doesn't
to
bring them any
fix
If
it.
they
benefit.
shut it down, it does not blame the other. Right now, he needs to blame the other, that somebody else is doing this to us, so we need to fight them. That's the point he's trying to make. So if he would bomb it, and
Wow, you
uh,
seems to know him very well.
No, that's a very
All right.
powerful
sorry,
and
Sharon.
very
No,
effective
I don't know why
method.
one. I'm not sure whether. Okay, so the thing is, in the past, he has done that. He killed his men. He throw away bodies on problems. He has done that in the past. If you read history, that's how he has done his wars. Many wars. He doesn't care about the human or his soldiers like American do or other people do. He throw away his people, his resources, just to gain his own, power. And I would not be surprised if he has perpetrated this attack just to garner support. That, oh, look, Americans are now coming after for our pipelines, and they have
Right.
done this.
It was
Okay.
Steven Seagal that did it. He's the American that loves Russia. There's your solution.
Oh, interesting. What we do know is that the CIA notified Germany that this was going to happen before it happened.
Yes.
Now, if who did the CIA imagine was going to do this? And if it was Russia, wouldn't we be monitoring Russian vessels and aircraft and helicopters in that area? It's not a large area to monitor extensively. I imagine we would have, so that we could have evidence and say, we told you they were going to do this, and here they are doing it.
Yeah,
And
to that. Oh, sorry, John.
well, and my point is, we don't have. I imagine we did try. If that scenario um, is as I'm suggesting, then I imagine it's safe to assume that we would have monitored it, and then we would have evidence. But as of right now, we're not claiming that we have evidence. On the contrary, Russia's claiming they have evidence that we did it.
I'm
So
gonna open this completely can of worms, but it is an interesting proposition, right? And one can think about it broadly speaking, because who is the energy superpower or provision of Europe? It's Russia. And who is the arch nemesis historically of the Americans? It's Russia. So it's not too far fetched to state that the Americans, perhaps once and for all, finally cripple the Russian economy, cripple their ability to be the energy provider for much of the Eurasian continent,
right,
and therefore who takes up the slack. A
and
combination of allies and partners led by the United States who
right,
can charge much more for shale
right.
gas. LNG. So who ultimately comes out of this as a net winner? The United States. So,
Wildly so.
Yay.
and
And
I'm not,
also you have
I mean,
this.
If
No,
it
the European won't hate the American for doing this. That's another big risk for the
They
U.S.
are well aware.
Yeah, it is.
which
It's
I
which
mean
America.
the Europeans.
Well,
Okay.
America doesn't have anything to worry about. It's across an ocean. It has two, and this is another thing I wanted to mention actually. The geography of Russia plays hugely into this, because Russia has the worst geography if you're talking about trying to ensure national security and protection of your borders. Above, you've got a massive ocean with rising sea levels, Arctic, that is major passage for other countries to go through. To the south, you've got the Chinese. You've got a group of countries that were your friends but are now increasingly, hostile and vacant. To the west, you've got a bunch of countries which you've fought multiple wars over with historically. The United States, you've got a very friendly bunch of maple syrup people up above, no offense. And then to the south, you've got a country that was beaten pretty solidly in a major conflict 100 and so years ago. So America, and two very well bordered western and eastern coastlines. So America really doesn't have to worry about the threat of what's going on in Europe to its direct south. So it can get away with sort of I don't know what, jeopardizing the pipeline and then benefiting from it longer term. But again, I do feel that it's a stretch to think that the Americans would sort of destroy the entire energy of Germany at a time that they're going to depend on it in the winter. But
Yeah. By the way,
understand the
no,
the
oh,
U.S. has a military base uh, about 300 kilometers, so let's say 230, 40, 50 miles from well, actually less. It's about 200 miles, about 270 kilometers from where the incident happened, which is where Jeffrey Sachs is pointing to the military helicopters that were seen in the area, uh, or are tracked having been in the area. So it's from Gdansk, Poland, which is on the north shore of Poland, which is just south and a tad east of where this happened. Anyway, we got to move on from this topic.
Tyler, just short, because I'm from Germany and you were talking about, maybe Piotr, I misunderstood you, but we definitely will not have gas in the winter, and Nord Stream 2 is strategically makes a lot of sense to to destroy it as to show the seriousness of the US with their just with their foreign policy, and not to have the Germans again into any temptation, maybe 5 years in the future or 10 years in the future, to go back to Russia. So it makes a lot of sense. I have no problem because we are civilians in this room. I think most of us, not everyone. And so for us, it might look strange, but in war, you also impress your enemy if you don't care about huge losses. Yeah, whether it's man, as Aram told us, of
Exactly.
course, he is in Chechnya. In Chechnya, he already has shown that he's absolutely reckless. Yeah, so it's clear. But in the civilian terms, it's reckless. In the military terms, it's a kind of
Show
I don't know,
power.
strategy or mentality. So be careful, because this happens in war all over the world, all over history, that you show that you have not any fear about losing some reputation, if it's only the reputation of some not so important people. And it makes a lot of sense for me. And the other thing was the nuclear. I didn't look it up, but I think after the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, maybe like 5 or 10 years later, there was again a city. I don't know. I just don't know. Sorry. But the idea that nuclear is destroying the whole country and makes no sense to use nuclear is a bit reductionistic, because it depends. And I don't know what you can do with having much radioactivity and having in different heights exploding your nuclear. And then after some rainfall and 2 3 years, there is not so much left. Maybe you have, of course, still some mutations, and it's not very healthy. But it's. I think it's a bit too fast to think that he could not do it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The thermonuclear the MERVs that are accessible, if we were to go to any level of multi-bomb reality, is not something. I'm sorry. I would argue the science all day long that you're proposing. I think that MAD is still out there as a real uh, unfolding if somebody started to slap on the buttons. So there is no. It's not rational. I'm sorry to
Mhm.
believe that you could have a limited tactical, even though the misnomer or the oxymoronic idea of a tactical nuclear exchange is
I
something
agree.
that we just
agree.
need to kind of
I
quash
agree.
a little bit
Happened
here.
in
David, I
Hiroshima.
agree. This is a different argument, because it was about you will not destroy your own country, and your argument is different. So, and the other thing I had in mind, it was 2 days ago in another room. I don't remember who said it. It was a smart argument that it's like shooting the hostage, and uh, killing Nord Stream 2 is like shooting the hostage in a advantage this way for the West, because if you take options away from Putin, it always means a lot of pain to him. So he has no longer the option to have this kind of hostage. You get back your gas. Just say yes to this or that in 2 or 3 years. Now the option is gone, and I think because of the salt water, the 10 billion investment, which was not just the state investment, but with many companies, yeah, these 10 billions are just waste now, I guess, but I'm not sure. But this is the price in this game, as I said, and it makes a lot of sense what the other guy said 2 days ago, that you just have Putin has a hostage, and when you shoot his hostage, yeah, then he gets a bit more desperate because his options are lower than before. And this 10 billion's worth.
Yeah, I remember that was an analogy I made. I think it's appropriate in this case. I want to move on, though. Thank you for everybody's thoughts on all of this. That there's one last non-tech news I wanted to cover real briefly on the cover of BBC, which is that now this Iranian protesting seems to be escalating. It says in an unprecedented move, schoolgirls have joined the protests that have swept Iran since the death of a woman detained for breaking the hijab law. Videos verified by BBC show teenage students in uniforms waving their headscarves in the air while shouting slogans against clerical authorities. The chants echoed those heard at the wider protests over the past 2 weeks. And yeah, there is videos of young ladies at what appears to be high schools, lots of them, lots and lots of them, chanting death to the dictator. And the person sharing this is from Iran, and they say in their tweet, it's hard to put into context just how unprecedented these scenes are in Iran. Well, because you grew up your entire life under the threat of torture for doing this, and so to see crowds of people doing this, no doubt, is unprecedented. So,
Just if I
super.
may, if anyone checks my photo there, profile photo, that's a photo from Iran in 1970 when the Shah was in power. So obviously controversial, historically speaking, but that gives you some context as to, hey, they weren't always this way. It was actually a very progressive society. And there was this kind of, uh, few decades dip, and now it might seem that they're coming back to modern society, and this is where they were back in 1970.
So check this out. So Iran is blaming the U.S. for these protests, and it is very interesting to think that with what's happening, the destabilization of China's economy at the moment, and the conundrum that Russia finds itself in, and these
It's like a hat trick.
it is because even Putin in his recent speech that he gave specifically names how China and Russia and Iran are trying to stand up to the world order, and they are blaming the U.S. for the difficulties they're now facing. Each of them, Putin squarely blames the U.S. for what's happening in Ukraine. By the way, in his own speech, so he keeps referring to the world order run by the U.S. and how everyone else is willing to go along with it, and these brave few countries like China and Iran and Russia are willing to stand up to this hegemony of that's sort of the gist of his rant. That
These projects are massive. They're the largest since 2009, and some people put them on the same scale as 79 in the way that they're going. 80 plus cities. The fact that we've had support from everywhere in the world. That they are big. And I think that they're going to continue for a while. Some analysts I've spoken to said, "Oh no, they'll just die down. They'll go away after a few days." But they've been going on for what, 2 weeks, and this is the point. You started with one motivation, which in this case is women's rights, and the treatment of them by the morality police, to now again the whole thing of regime change. And at a time that we've got Ukraine continuing, we've got other things like, if you're unaware, there was 35 Hazara people in Afghanistan were killed because of a suicide bombing. And this again, they were targeted because they're women. So it just brings back into the fray women's rights in this region. And Iran, it borders Afghanistan, so you've got a two-way battle in the sense of people wanting to dismantle or overthrow the oppressive regime, be it the Taliban or the Islamic Republic. So it's very if you get things going on in one place, it can refuel that,
Well,
reignite motivation of people who
well,
started a
if
flailing.
if if this protesting in Iran leads to a revolution, and they're able to throw out the what's the name of the Ayatollah, that would very potentially remove Iran as this very important partner with China and Russia in their grand global ambitions of creating a alternative superpower of sorts, to use kind of Putin's own frame.
Yeah, the tripartite axis, as we're calling it, I think.
They can blame whoever they want, but historically, the repression and suppression of so many different nationalities and minorities like Baha'is, the Kurdish, the Baloch, the other factions who are trying to live their lives normally would say against it. They will raise their voice against this oppression that has been ongoing for so many years. So they can
Yeah.
blame US for it, but US did not make all these people oppressed and repressed and force them to do things that this regime have done to them. So the public is speaking the truth for themselves. They can blame whoever, that there is no proof of that, but the proof of their long-term oppression of all of these minorities who are now speaking up, that's the proof right
I
there.
wonder how much money, since the announcement of the passing of the girl, how much American funding has gone into that, either officially or unofficially. I'm sure it's on the order of a few billion potentially at this point. So these kind of
Americans
disturbances are
are
great
fun.
opportunity. Sorry,
If
go ahead.
Americans are funding people who are powerless, more power to America. I'm for the powerless.
Okay, yeah, yeah, agreed.
Mhm.
I'll say this on this issue, and I've said it before, that many of my very, very, very dearest friends that are Persian Swedes or Americans or what have you, actually both, and something that I think I wish more Americans understood is that there are, I mean, having lived in Japan and Thailand and Sweden and the U.S. and uh, I and living in Thailand, I see a lot of different cultures that come into Thailand, and some of them are very, very compatible with Thai. Thais are kind of unique culturally, and Swedes, for example, are incredibly compatible, very, very, very compatible with Thais. Russians are not; they're very, very not compatible with the Thai way of conversating and conflict resolution and whatnot. It usually doesn't end well, and or takes an incredible amount of intelligence and positive intention to make sure that it goes well. Where the point I want to make is Americans and Persians, people from Iran, by default, get along incredibly well. When left, if an American meets an Iranian person in somewhere in Europe or anywhere else in the world, and politics aside, I'm telling you, Americans and people from Iran or Persians or whatever get along famously well. Absolutely have a fucking blast together. So it's for this reason that I say I would love to see Iran become a friend of the U.S. And that, as crazy as that sounds, because we all grew up with it, after the Ayatollah, that at one point Japan was the enemy of the US. At one point Germany was an enemy of the US, etc. And now they are incredibly close allies, and it's my dream that Iran would be very more closely, thought of as and the US were on much more friendly terms. And I know
Man,
they can. I know they can be. For the point I'm making, that fundamentally on a human level, we're very compatible in
On a
terms of.
human level, but also just imagine the amount of I'm being very idealistic here, of course, but like imagine the amount of things that would probably be at least improved. They wouldn't be supporting the Houthis in Yemen. They wouldn't be supporting Hezbollah. They wouldn't be supporting Hamas. They wouldn't be supporting a hell of a load of factions in Syria. You would see a huge proportion of the RIG and other, things that they use to prop up Soleimani. He had his fingers on all these pies, didn't he? So imagine you remove the regime and you suddenly see hopefully a great stability arriving to many corners of the Middle East over time. But
Yeah.
it'd be great to have Iran re-engage with everybody.
Yeah, that's a
Or
great point. It's important to remember that these Germans are not those Germans, I think are the famous words, right? So it's usually a function of the administration. So when we say the Russians, the Iranians, we mean the Iranian government. And I think oftentimes when that gets lost in conversation, some sort of cognitive dissonance forms where people sometimes merge the two and then they have some like just natural negativity towards those people. So resetting that is definitely important.
same
I
with
think an
the.
important. I'm sorry.
I just as a closing thought on that, having been to Colombia and Cuba, love them, love. I got nothing but tons of love for the amazing, uniquely special people of Cuba and Colombians as well. And I highly encourage Americans to visit both places. You'll be glad you did. Go ahead.
I was just going to simply say, when it comes down to getting more granular on a specific how human rights are defined, is where the big gap is. And so you bring up a really good point in terms of a shared humanity, but the way that we allow or disallow, everything from speech, expression, reproductive rights, all of these things. Here in the States, I think everybody's very aware of. We're kind of going through some challenges with regards to what have been commonly respected as human rights for a few decades. So that's where we need to make more progress as a shared humanity. But that's been the challenge for a long time, forever maybe.
Okay, moving right
And if
along.
anyone's interested, just quickly, Tyler, I just bringing up the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
There's some historical context, and also technology was used. So it's actually quite profound that that this has grown to the point that it has in Iran, because after the Arab Spring, regimes such as this one wanted to make sure to put a lid on things, so to speak.
I thought the Arab Springs was America taking advantage of climate change in the Middle East, and the disruption and chaos that it caused was amplified.
Okay. So into the tech news. The top story today is that the European Parliament votes to about the issue of a standard data charging cable. Okay. Now, what do you think? No, Cheryl, don't. Too late. I was going to do Tech News Jeopardy. So, how do
I
we
don't think you have a
imagine?
chance to click yet. Go ahead.
How do we imagine that the European Parliament voted? That the votes have been counted. The votes are in, and the question is, what? There's many questions. What cable will be used? I'll answer that for you. It's USB-C. The question is, did they vote in favor or against it? The answer is they voted in favor of it. And the question is, by how much? There's a total number of votes of 615 total. How many voted in favor of a standardized USB-C data charging cable for devices?
I would say 95 to 97.
603.
475.
I mean 95 to 97%. Sorry.
42.
So Eric won it. It's 602
Wow, we have a smart kid on the block.
to
600.
33.
How
One vote.
many percent? How many?
Wow.
So it was a
Wow,
land.
that's like Politburo voting right
Wow.
there.
How do you
So,
know, Eric? You read the article?
yeah.
Yeah, read the article.
So
What's
Margaret,
the percentage?
He's
Margaret,
sorry.
that's right. Margaret Vestager, the Danish. woman who is kind of is this is her neck of the woods policy wise against big tech. She tweeted saying, "Single charger, here we go. Final plenary debate as of autumn 2024. The time when we had to fight with many different chargers will start becoming a memory of old strange times of unnecessary cost, waste, and inconvenience." So I guess that's a year from now when it will go into effect. Okay, next up from Wired, the White House's new AI Bill of Rights, including helping opt out of algorithmic decision making, is non binding and so will have little impact on companies. There you go. There's your powerful tech lobby at work, making it non binding. Well done to the K Street and the lobbyists on behalf of big tech who have effectively neutered that policy. Okay, next is New York Times. The U.S. Treasury releases a digital assets report asking Congress for more resources to police crypto, regulate stablecoins, legislate crypto tokens, and more. Yeah, it's more than just a few kids in the garage. They're going to need quite a bit of resources.
Going to be called the Create Jobs in Crypto Bill.
Yep. The next is Bloomberg says they have sources. You know where this is going. It's about Apple. Whoever is leaking this shit, really, Bloomberg should just cut them some equity in Bloomberg at this point. Like I'm guessing 5 to 10% would be reasonable. Apple's iPhone exports from India crossed $1 billion since April 2022 and could reach $2.5 billion by March of next year. Okay, so they actually, whoever this leaker is, has access to the accounting department, apparently. Next up, New York Times says Micron plans to spend up to $100 billion over 20 years to build a chip-making complex in upstate New York, helped by federal and state government incentives. That's a lot of money, but not when you consider how important chips are in the world today and giving us a asymmetrical advantage and a bit of leverage over the have-nots. And this is part of the whole grand reordering of the world at the moment of the haves and the have-nots and team, USA with all of its allies and our shiny new chips versus
And
yeah.
congratulations to upstate New York and also the chip companies. They don't have to worry about the water issues up there because there's plenty of water up in upstate New York.
Um, um, the next one is some YouTube users say that YouTube is asking them to purchase a premium subscription to watch videos in 4K resolution, a feature that is currently free for all users. That's interesting. YouTube's premium paid subscription includes benefits like ad-free viewing, video and song downloads for offline consumption, and background plays, meaning you can darken your screen on your phone and still listen to whatever's going on. And now they're testing, according to some YouTube users, they're seeing a test going on
Yeah.
for.
Oh, to test people. Nothing to see here. It's just a test. We're trying to see how much bullshit you're willing to take.
What's interesting though,
Yeah, who even notices? I have a YouTube premium subscription. I
me
bought
too,
it because of ad free. I have no
yeah,
idea what else it includes.
me too. Well, no, I know it
And
included
I
the
don't
things.
care.
Well, no, but the point is that they're starting to take away more features from the free service to cajole them into signing up for premium, because the people who haven't signed up for premium need an additional little push, if you see what I'm saying, to join the premium, and now they're chipping away at one additional feature, which is 4K. Makes sense.
These days it's very difficult to watch YouTube properly without having like continuously interrupted by two Japanese advertisements every few minutes. It's
Yeah,
annoying.
I couldn't live with the ads. I had the and in Thailand it's so
Me
cheap.
neither. That's exactly why I chose premium. But on the other hand, on my phone, do I care if it's in 4K?
No, it's more
What
for the
about what effect would that have on the content creators, though, Tyler? I still watch a lot of content creators that create a lot of the things outdoors, and the 4K is spectacular. Uh,
well. It doesn't impact them at all because you upload it in the highest resolution possible, and let's say they upload it in 4K, so that 4K is an option for the viewer. But if 4K isn't an option for the viewer, then they'll just downscale it automatically to all the other resolutions, which is what they've always done. They'll give you, and then it'll play the highest resolution version that your hardware is capable of viewing, and then you're gonna be like, wait a minute, I've got a 4K screen, and my system can handle watching 4K YouTube. I want to watch 4K, and then you'll see a little thing that says premium, and so that's their clever way of tricking you into paying for 4K because you
no, but
already
that's
have.
my
And
point: is
it,
how will it affect the subscriber base for these different content creators potentially? If
I
if
don't think
if,
it
if
will.
something looks spectacular, I just think that what specifically would be measurable there is the added engagement level of 4K, and as you remove that for non-subscribers, how will that who had
It,
4K? I'm just really
it,
curious to see
it
how
could.
that
I
unfolds.
It's
think that's why
it's
I asked.
it's a good question. It could hurt content creators who specialize in 4K content, and there are such. And in fact, I thoroughly enjoy. There's a content creator who walks around Tokyo silently, and
In the
it's
night, in the rain and stuff.
yeah, and the best clips are the ones that are at night in the rain. Those are glorious, by the way. And when you watch it on a really good screen in 4K, and they take a lot of care to put really good sound and 4K, and it to me this is incredibly valuable content because it saves me a trip of getting on a plane to Tokyo, right? So yeah, that content creator is greatly hurt by this. Yeah,
I think there's two different types of viewers as well, because depending on the combination of your viewing distance and the size of the screen, sometimes you can't actually see. For quite a few people, you can't see, physically cannot see the difference between 4K and 1440p. I can paste in the chat after this a diagram you can look up for your viewing distance and so forth, based on just your visual acuity. So there'll be the people who can't see but look at the setting and get upset that it's not 4K without realizing that it wouldn't actually make any difference if it was 4K. In a blind test, they wouldn't be able to tell. And then there's the people for which it really does make a difference, who are close enough to a screen of a given size, i.e. within a couple of meters of a 65-inch screen, for
It's
example.
like wine tasting, Ben. It's just
I,
like wine tasting.
I don't know. I don't have the world's best screen, and it's abundantly obvious to me when it's 4K or not. It depends on the camera they used as well. Because
Yeah, but it's
if you're
yeah, but
uploading
it's
4K content in 4K, then it doesn't really matter. Like for example, if you, I imagine you could shoot content in 1080p and upload it as a 4K video. It wouldn't look any better than the 1080p version that's downscaled, anyways.
Although you can
yeah. I
use
mean,
the
it's not.
video editing programs to upscale it, and it does a pretty good job in some instances because of the all the deep learning stuff. So, but it's not as good as if you were to film it in 2K and then upscale it to 4K. So,
Yeah, there's a big difference between 4K on your iPhone and 4K on a Red or
Yeah,
or some other highly professional camera. Big difference in dynamic range and bokeh effect, all sorts of things.
for sure.
Um, but I would think you would be surprised how many people, if you give them a blind test between 1440, not 1080, big difference, but between 1440p and hold on, that is 4K. What are they saying they're limiting? What are they saying they're limiting it to in the article? Let me have a look. Is it if
They're
you're
saying
not premium?
that 4K would be limited to premium users.
Yeah, so they're limiting the rest of 1440p, which is, I don't think most people are going to see the difference between 1440p and 4K in a blind test, depending on the size of your screen and your viewing distance. It's a bit like 8K TVs. It's almost impossible to sit close enough to an 8K TV to see the difference. In a store, you walk right up to it, get your face right up to it, and it's incredible. But if you actually put it in a room, you would have to be ridiculously close. I'll post a chart so that it's worth
Yeah,
looking
like
at.
1.5 to 2.5 times the distance of the diagonal length of the TV is the optimal viewing distances or distance for most TVs. So at that distance, you can't differentiate the pixels at those resolutions. That's what Apple calls Retina display. So that's
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
not always necessary to be 4K. It's just a matter of the scaling ratios.
Yeah. I'll put a good thing in the chat. It won't
It,
matter. People still want to buy the big number. They won't. They're not going to make a rational purchasing decision anyway. They're going to want the 8K TV, even though you can't tell the difference. Um, but still worth knowing if you can save yourself some money.
okay. Yeah, it depends on the content and the camera and and the type of content for sure. Um, so next
Well, I'm
article.
saying it specifically only depends on the screen size and the distance. The
Yeah,
rest of that stuff makes a huge difference. But there's a
yeah.
cap. There's a distance you sit from the screens beyond which you're not going to tell between 4K and
So
8K and between 4K and 1440. That's the
I,
key. And people buy these specs like we buy high megapixel cameras, while the professionals are out buying relatively low megapixel cameras so they can get better light, reception. Same with
yeah,
refrigerators. We buy refrigerators that are big inside. Um, for the same size outside, realizing that Doctor Who's TARDIS isn't really a thing, and then we end up with thin walls, and then the refrigerator's not that efficient, and so forth. We buy funny specs sometimes. Small willy, big numbers is what we end up buying.
I'm
so
inquisitive to if YouTube is going to share this revenue with content creators.
they do on the ads, not on the subscription content, not on the subscriber fees.
Because in a way they are kind of limiting their viewership. They may reduce the number of viewing based on these limitations. And shouldn't they kind of provide some compensation to content creators since they are trying to make money off of this new kind of restrictive viewing?
But it
I
might
think
increase revenue like
I,
Chick-fil-A.
I think they should then um, allow content creators to charge subscriptions for their 4K versions, and then you
Yeah.
would get paid for your 4K versions as a content creator. Maybe then you could split it.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah, that is a cool idea because then those content creators who specialize in good 4K content that use good cameras and whatnot. And by the way, it requires a lot more hard drive space and takes longer to edit and upload, and
And bandwidth to stream, which is not free from a
it,
carbon per gigabyte is not free. So
it's
if the subscribers have
yeah,
to pay, that makes sense if
you
they
need a
really feel
better
they can see the difference.
computer. You can't just use your run of the mill MacBook Pro. You got to get the one with the new processor and all. It's a little bit of a pain in the ass to do 4K. So uh, I kind of like the idea that they have an incentive economically to do the 4K stuff. The rumors are that YouTube prefers content creators who upload in 4K, and they get a boost for uploading in 4K anyways in terms of visibility and discoverability.
Yeah,
Okay,
because it kind of sounds unfair for the people who have invested the money and
right,
creating all these videos, drawing all this attention, and now YouTube comes in and take a cut.
right. Samsung details a 5-year roadmap for mass producing advanced chips, including second generation 3 nanometer chips in 2024, 2 nanometer chips in 2025, and 1.4 nanometer chips in 2027, which would continue the tech train chugging along as China gets frozen in 2020. What is China claiming now? 5 nanometer, Cheryl? Or
No
7?
idea.
Yeah,
I
Um,
thought it was 7
seven,
nanometers.
seven, yeah,
7.
seven.
Yeah. Anyway, they're going to get. This is. It seems unrelated. This is not unrelated. This is incredibly directly related to why, at this moment, we're deciding to cut ties with China and Russia and sanction them into a kind of North Korean Cuban, where they're going to be working on devices with, at best 7 nanometer chips for and 50 years from now, people will visit there and oh my God, you should have seen these crazy devices they had from, fucking 2022, like we do when we go to Cuba and they're driving around cars from the 50s. So Meta
And the
announced.
unfortunate thing about that, Tyler, is that those devices will use an extraordinary amount more power. The difference between a 14 nanometer and a, I don't really believe 1.4 nanometer, right? But yeah, small, very
I'm
small
with you.
process
I'm
size.
with you on that. Yeah.
That, by the way, as they start to get desperate, as they hit a technological limitation, which is around the 1 nanometer order of magnitude, we're going to see there's no completely standard way, as I understand it, of measuring the process size. People choose a slightly different thing to measure where they put their ruler. So as they get desperate, expect some jostling and people like stretching the definitions and stuff, because we are really running up against the physical limits now. So
Reuters says that Meta announces something called AI Template, an open source unified inference system for both AMD and NVIDIA GPU hardware, helping code run 4 times to 12 times faster. And Facebook parent Meta Platforms said on Monday it had launched a new set of free software tools called AI Template, open source to help those GPU hardware makers run code 10 times faster on average. MasterCard announces something called Crypto Secure, which uses AI to help banks identify and stop transactions from fraud-prone crypto exchanges. That's cool. Google discontinues Google Translate in mainland China, one of the last remaining services that Google provides in China, citing low usage. A federal court rules that the CFTC appropriately served OkiDao through a website help bot and forum post in a lawsuit over violating federal trading laws. So, for those who don't know how American legal system works, you have to serve somebody to let them know, they're being sued, basically. And the question normally you have to find them physically to serve the papers to them. That's called serving them. And in this case, the court ruled that posting in their forum online was appropriate, which is a bit surprising. I'm not an expert in this area by any means, but I didn't think that posting things online would count as legal sufficient.
You've been
Serving.
virtually served.
You've been served. Um,
Welcome to the metaverse, bitch.
yeah, I can't wait for people to get served in the metaverse. That'll be hilarious, and it'll be recorded. Google's Nest announces the $180 Nest doorbell wired and a $200 Nest Wi-Fi Pro and Wi-Fi 6E support, updates the Home app and confirms support for Matters. So it'll be much more compatible with a lot more stuff. Wall Street Journal says they have sources that talks between the U.S. and TikTok over national security agreement have accelerated ahead of the midterms as Republicans vow to hold hearings. Yeah, TikTok must be shitting themselves that the Republicans might potentially win the midterms. So they need to make an agreement before the voting happens, or they're risking getting kicked out of the U.S. Plan to secure user data is nearing conclusion, sources say, but hurdles remain, and Republicans warn against concessions to video app's Chinese owner. Horizon Blockchain Games, which develops the sequence developer platform Nifty Swap Marketplace, raises $40 million. Twitter rolls out its edit button, letting users edit 5 times in 30 minutes to blue subscribers. There you go. There's another
For your
feature.
money back.
So now, if you're a paid Twitter subscriber, what they call Twitter Blue, you get the edit button in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, coming soon to the US. So, will you pay to edit your tweets? And then Mark Gurman from Bloomberg says via Twitter that he's moving to Australia so that he can take advantage of this feature. Xiaomi announces a new flagship 12T phone featuring a 108 megapixel camera for just $600. Now, having one of Xiaomi's previous phones, they tend to make phones that, on paper, have very similar, and in some cases slightly better specs than iPhones for about exactly half the price. And here it is again. They did it again. Their flagship phone. They just also released the 12T Pro with a 200 megapixel camera. Wow. Whatever that means, it doesn't really mean anything. What matters is, what you see with your eyes at the end of the day. But it's coming out October 13th, and I can't wait to see what the reviews on that 200 megapixel camera on a smartphone.
The thing is that each of those pixels is going to be physically much smaller than the pixels on an iPhone, and therefore less light sensitive. So again, people, why are you buying 200 megapixels? What do you hope to do with 200 megapixels? How are you going to achieve low light performance when a pixel is so much smaller? It's going to be, well, instead of 40 megapixels, it's going to be, 5 times smaller each pixel, the area. So therefore, it's going to gather 5 times less light, so 5 times more photons needed before it triggers any light at all. So it's extreme low light performance. I think fundamentally it has to be much, much worse, and people don't factor that in. Anyway, just a thought.
We will find out next week when the reviews come in. If not sooner, they might leak devices as they often do.
Back in the day when the digital SLRs were first starting to rocket ship, I remember them saying that as you cross past 8 megapixels in digital photography, that you're starting to get to the point of how far the human eye can perceive in a picture. Does anybody know what the updated number of megapixels would be to where the human eye
So
is really
8
cannot?
megapixels is about like what 4K. So I think the human eye is believed to be between 16 to 64K. I think is the range, and it's also weird because you have the center, which is more high resolution, but then your brain does all this fancy vision stuff. So
Remember
Okay,
that
next.
people crop into photos a lot, and that changes the game as well completely. When you want a bit of crop in, then you're throwing a lot of data away, and if more pixels mean you can do more cropping, which is a good sign.
also
Uh,
weird zoom with the telescope.
Yeah, also a lot of stuff is computational photography now, so that changes the game completely. If a camera doesn't, it's not like it used to be. Your iPhone is doing a lot of work when you take a photograph, and compositing a lot of things together and doing a huge number of calculations, and that really shifts the balance of how photography works. So you need to look at it through a whole new lens, if you excuse the pun.
and just adding to what I always said, it's just like this that around the spot where you can see very sharp, it's actually very blurry, and the brain is doing a lot of calculation. And if you go to this, for me, a really important video on YouTube of Mark Zuckerberg with his expert on the hardware side of the metaverse. Yeah, the how do you call it? The VR goggles, yeah, of course. Uh, he is talking about that they had hard pains in research to find out a way only to render this spot where you look very sharp. Else, it would be a lot of performance power wasted because the eye is just is just not perceiving beyond this
I think it's called
sharp spot.
foveated rendering.
Excuse me.
I
Excuse
think
me.
it's called foveated rendering, if I'm
Yeah,
not
I
mistaken.
think it's like that, and I really recommend this interview. This is not the topic here in the moment, but for me, it was like a kind of investor call that they are far, far, far away from creating a really good usability, user experience for the VR headset. And it's the projection, like having 1 billion in the metaverse, whether it's owned by Meta or it's shared by others. This 1 billion is about 2030. So this is still the plan of Mark Zuckerberg, but it's super hard to make it feasible, like we were used to use computer displays like on our laptops, or using our little our tiny laptop tiny displays on the smartphone screen. It's much different, and it felt like, if you listen carefully, that they are still in the beginning, and they have a lot of prototypes which are very heavy and expensive. And yeah, it's a very honest, because Mark Zuckerberg has to make sure that he has not kind of made erroneous claims about how close they are, yeah, because of course, the investment.
Okay.
One last point on that. Aside from the camera, do we know if there's a surveillance chip or any kind of surveillance hardware specifically in their product line? That's another feature that you might get with those products.
But it's free of charge, by the way.
Now includes free backdoor.
Yeah. They call it the backdoor, the Pro, backdoor Pro. The next story is about the Internet Archive, as the preservation project grows from 2 terabytes in 1997 to 100 petabytes, and issues with scraping paywalled news sites and social media and whatever. So, interesting story from Financial Times there. Wall Street Journal's reporting that Apple's supplier list now shows that 48 of their Apple suppliers have had manufacturing sites in the US in September 2021. So, exactly a year ago, Apple supplier list had 48 of them in the US 1 year ago. That's double what they were the year before that. So in 2020, it was 25. In 2021, it was 48. More than 30 sites were in California, up from about 10 the year before. So what that means is Apple's suppliers are very quickly moving back to the US, or moving from ostensibly China, specifically Shenzhen, to California.
Pivot, pivot.
Or even the engraving. Do they still engrave on the back of a phone? They used to, designed in Cupertino or whatever, and made in China. But it'd be interesting if they put just, but supplied from back in the States. That'd be an interesting development.
So Indonesia's premium streaming video service called Video is outperforming Netflix and Disney Plus in consumption in the world's fourth most populous country, which is Indonesia. And Apple's App Store net revenues fell by around 5% in September, the steepest drop since 2015. Walgreens is setting up a network of automated drug filling centers, expecting robots to cut pharmacists' workloads and save the company more than $1 billion a year. So here come the robotic arms to replace the pharmacists. The NVIDIA, which has suspended shipments to Russia, plans to close its Russian offices and offer employees the option to continue their jobs in other countries, because America told them.
Tyler,
Yeah.
that Apple used to outsource to in China, um, working conditions were so bad. What
Yeah.
happens to them now that China has, now Apple has quit supplying in China? What happens to that company? Or do they just move their offices to wherever Apple is
I'll tell
going
you this.
now?
I have friends in Vietnam, one of my very dearest friends in Vietnam, and I've heard that recently Vietnamese border patrol is catching Chinese people trying to sneak into Vietnam to work in the factories that have moved to Vietnam.
Oh, that's interesting. Because the Apple, one of the things that stopped, supposedly, that stopped manufacturing from leaving China was that there were trained workers, you
Right,
know, and process training.
right.
And I can't remember the name of the company. Does anyone else remember it? I think it began with
Yes.
an F.
Foxconn.
Foxconn.
Foxcom, that's it.
It's a Taiwanese company, by the way.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Taiwanese company.
Oh, okay, so Foxcom just builds an office somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And
Manufacturing plant.
Yeah, and mostly they're doing the assembly. And in China, they have raised the basic salary over the years. So actually, right now in China, assembling those iPhones are not as cheap as before. And I mean, the advantage of manufacturing in China is they put all the workers near the factory. They usually have this dorm, so it's much easier to manage. That's another advantage. I think it's very hard for the Americans. So in the southern eastern countries like Tyler just said, Vietnam, and it's easier there as well. But in India, we saw the protest months ago, several months ago. So right now, this coupling force this like Foxconn and other Apple suppliers to move out of China. They are facing other labor issues, but of course, in the end, we're fixed. But we'll see the raising the price, yes, as well.
Okay. Next and last of the big stories is from the New York Times. They say they have sources that this week the United States is likely to limit access of several Chinese AI and supercomputing companies and labs to U.S. technology, machinery, and software. Wow, it's almost like the U.S. is trying to stop China from advancing technologically. Is anyone else getting this feeling? As soon as this week, several Chinese AI and supercomputing companies will be banned from doing anything with U.S. tech, machinery, and software. Oh, did Paul
isn't
Moser?
it too late?
Hold on here. This is New York Times. Let me see who wrote this one. Where did it go? Where's that story? Here we go. Sorry. Here's the story. Who wrote the story? Oh, what do you know? It's Paul Moser. Wow, Paul did it again. Another fantastic article written by the New York Times. As it's almost like Paul has I mean he has two co-writers on this piece, Edward Wong and Anna Swanson. Kudos to all.
Sources. He has
Yeah.
sources.
So a data center in Guangzhou, China, if enacted, new rules would be the strongest push to date by the U.S. to hit at China's semiconductor and data center market. We're taking you out. We're not going to allow you to have access to the chips and digitization and the future. You're going to be stuck in the 21st, early part of the 21st century while the rest of us proceed into the future. And game's over. You were stealing all of our IP. You were going to try and take over the world. We figured out the game. We don't like you. We're kicking you out of the party. You got to go home.
They tried to break dollars hegemony, and that's what they get in return.
That's
I have a
exactly
little
right.
theme song for what Tyler was saying. So that's what this feels like.
America's not fucking around. We're going to send you as far back in time as we can. Look at Cuba and be careful because Cuba, by the way, you should look at photos of Cuba from 1956. glorious, really stunning, really, really, really stunning, really incredibly beautiful, and amazing
And
building.
it's a case of arrested development. It looks like that now,
Yes, well, it's a
only with
crumbling.
time having passed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and they meant
Well, it's
the cars still look new, but they're old. But the buildings are crumbling. Yeah.
yeah, it's an essential play. China, to my knowledge, extracts and processes most of the rare earth metals in the world. And those resources are incredibly important for technology. So, this is uh, America's actual sure bet is to attack the technological advancement and then also to protect the value of the dollar.
And can other countries extract rare earth? We just don't have the infrastructure and don't want the pollution.
Yeah, pollution is a huge
Yeah.
factor in extracting these rare earth metals, unfortunately.
So the Biden administration expected to announce new measures to restrict Chinese companies from getting access to technologies that enable high performance computing. According to several people familiar with the matter, the latest in a series of moves aimed at hobbling Beijing's ambitions to craft next generation weapons and automate large scale surveillance systems.
But Tyler, is this the true motivation? Because US is losing out on this technology, that's why they're doing all those things just to stop them from progressing. I'm just
Yes, America was falling behind in AI for sure,
yeah.
and AI is enabled by American chips. So that was a conundrum, and China was making all kinds of advances. Great point, by the way, Cheryl. This part deserves to be in the movie that inevitably gets made here, which is China was starting to kick America's ass on a lot of these important tech advances.
Hmm.
It's a question of industrial policy. Back in the 80s, uh, America was very concerned about in the rise of Japan back then. So, I mean, we've had some, with this rationalization for this concept of globalization, corporate America just outsourced all kinds of stuff to Beijing, a bunch of the high tech stuff. There were some big key thefts, but this is just the need for industrial policy. The Semiconductor Act, or I forget what the name of it was, is part of the same thing. It's all rolled up, and it's kind of Washington's wising up to the threat.
Yeah, but China plans to make something like 100 million data scientists in the next decade or something. So I don't know how America plans to compete with that when kids in America rather become YouTubers than astronauts, which is what kids in China reportedly want to become. So I think there's also some policy with education that needs some refinement.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
so
this is
glad
why
you mentioned
TikTok's
that.
such a concern, is because of the algorithm of TikTok. If you look, it promotes STEM pretty much heavily and promotes the high achievers in society in China. In America, Tide Pods and dancing.
The real good point, another really good point you put
Oh,
in
that's
there,
an
Eric,
interesting
was just
difference.
just our higher ed institutions and the research that's done there, and our just whole philosophy of just having everything open, right? So that's a key part of this as well in terms of brain drain and just where is all the pinnacle of the research really done, and how easy is it to access it, and who's paying for the damn research as well. That's another component to higher ed research.
So kudos to Paul here because he phrases this very nicely here in this story. He says Washington also plans to limit US made microchips from being sold to China's most powerful supercomputing and data center projects. The limitation could end up inhibiting the ability of major academic institutions and internet firms like Alibaba and Tencent from getting the parts they need to build leading data centers and supercomputers. Over time, as supercomputer performance levels rise, the cap could seriously hinder China's ability to develop the powerful number crunching technology that forms the building block of innovations across an array of fields, including biosciences, AI, and missile engineering, curbs on chips, and chip making tools. You got it. So, Paul, you did it. You figured it out just like we did here tech news around the world. And New York Times, you should be proud. You got Paul on the team. You're lucky he's even working for you. It's amazing that you allow him in the building. Um, yeah, he figured it out. This is what's going on. This is the big thing going on right now. So, and by the way, it's not just China. It's China, Russia, and Iran. And the three of them had a plan to get the world off the dollar.
And
And
America pulled off a hat trick.
we ain't going down like that, yo. So next thing you know, there's protests here and blown up pipelines there, and and a crumbling economy over there. And watch out. Okay, so you fuck around and find out, as the saying goes. So now we go into the tweets. Did anyone have a tweet since we met yesterday that they want to share?
I mean, we already covered all the Elon's tweets.
Yes, we did.
So I shared a tweet, and it's relating to an NYU organic chemistry teacher who got fired because the students petition had a petition, and 80 odd some of the 300 students signed it, saying that he was well, they didn't even say it was unfair. What they highlighted was their concern was they only have two exams, the class has no extra credit, and they did not like his tone. So, as we just got through talking about beating China in technology, um, we got to look at our students and make sure that they can handle the education so that we can be better in technology. So I think some of our students have gotten used to grade inflation out there, and when they really hit the rubber really hits the road, maybe they can't handle the pressure. I hope so. I hope they can. But take a look at the article. I tweeted it out.
Hey, so Robert, I went to NYU. I haven't. I just saw the headlines, but even when I was a student, they would ask us to grade teachers, grade teachers, because they want that feedback. Sometimes you have teachers that maybe they're great academics and they could write great articles for journals, and they shouldn't be in a classroom. I actually had a political science professor who was an excellent teacher as a teacher, but I guess they were unhappy with his lack of scholarship, and he ended up going to another university because he couldn't get tenure. But I think he was a great teacher, and most people think he was a great teacher. And he was a tough grader, by the way. He was a tough grader even to be, but he was a great teacher. So I wouldn't put that much assessment into that. Even without even seeing the article, I mean, if 200 students think he's a problem, he might be a problem. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
universities are a business at the end of the day, so I think they do have to respond to the customers, and sometimes professors are assholes, and it's just something that happens. Normally, they become dinosaurs, and the things change when they pass away or leave. That's the only way these things usually change. So to see a university actually let somebody go, that's quite interesting. Is it known if he had tenure or not?
You know what? He actually was at Princeton and was brought over to NYU. I mean, he's 80 something years old. So for him, he's not arguing about trying to get rehired. He just doesn't want stuff like this to happen to other faculty members. It's something to think about because look, political science, I kind of get what you're saying, Ken and guys, but when you're talking about certain like science, you're either right or wrong. Really, you're either right or wrong. And I kind of struggle with decision by the masses when it comes to
Oh, so let's
getting
deal with
teacher.
let's deal with chemistry then. When I was in high school, there was, I mean, we had a bunch of different chemistry professors, and there was one that like was really not liked by a lot of students, and I got transferred out of his class because of that, and went to another chemistry class where I did exceptionally well. I actually got, I think, one of the highest scores
But you
in
learn the
the state
material. It's
region.
not that you got a better score, right? It's that you learn the material better in addition to getting a better score. I think that's
Hang,
the problem.
hang
Right,
on.
and that was about my point. It was the New York State Regents. He wasn't grading it, so I mean, it was the same test that everybody takes in New York State. But yeah,
I'm
he was a better professor in my view,
Yeah,
as a teacher. My view, yeah.
Is it possible, and I don't know the details of this, but is it possible that he's had the same curriculum for 50 years of his teaching? And what's happening is that the prerequisite courses that are supposed to prepare you for his class have declined in quality to the extent that his curriculum is underrated in terms of the number of units that ought to be earned for the amount of time invested to catch up with a deficit from earlier training. So is it conceivable, and I don't know the details, but that the curriculum hasn't changed, because the protest was mainly around, as I understood it, it's too hard, it's too much. And so the question is, did he up the ante, or did the entering qualifications decline?
Yeah, that actually happened in my university one year in a mathematical physics class. It was supposed to cover kind of complex analysis, but it didn't. The professor assumed everyone had it, and he just jumped in. And only halfway throughout the course, at the midterms, in fact, did people realize it was the wrong course, because he was just so like, no, this is the course. And in the end, it was kind of a quagmire in terms of how do you even resolve this now, because the next semester, the actual professor who was teaching it was a different professor, and he was going to be teaching that class. So they had to mix things around. But it was definitely, I think, an artifact of his aging, that he wasn't necessarily keeping up with how the curriculum was evolving, because it does evolve in response to industry demands as well. So there is some
But
sort of
don't you think the university would have fired him on that then versus, I mean, otherwise they're cowardly, to wait for the students to do a petition on something that has nothing to cover what all of you guys said. It's a critical path class that others have to take, and it's critical for them to go to med school. They're
welcome to
more
academia
concerned. Hold on, let me
politics.
finish. They're more concerned about their grade. So the university, if it was exactly what you guys are saying, the curriculum didn't keep up, then they're pretty cowardly to fire somebody due to the students protesting versus firing the person on their actual performance, right?
Yeah, I think that highlights the politics, the spicy politics of academia.
Well, again,
Well,
we don't have a full deck of information, but um, if that were the case, the appropriate course would have been to uh, discuss how to spread the material out over more time or give higher credits, so that it wasn't disproportionately sucking time out of a student's total curriculum. So I think there's, if what we're proposing is valid, and that's a big if because we don't know, the solution, rather than firing him for one cause or another, would have been better brokered through how do we adjust the units for the time investment required to pass to get a decent score in the class.
But why
And
is it about a decent score? Why isn't it about, these are the ground rules? Evidently, some students got decent
Okay,
scores.
Dream is calling me right
Don't some
now.
people
He's on
just
my
wash
face
out?
for the first time.
And why
I'm
can't
actually
we be
nervous.
okay with people washing out?
Yeah,
Well,
Oh
there is.
shoot! What
Yes.
the heck? It was
there's a
like a
spectrum.
baseball
There's a
series.
spectrum, and
Baseball
so there are
players.
easy classes and there are hard classes. And if he was
I didn't want to say anything.
significant, if he was a
Like, I don't
significant
know why I feel like
outlier amongst
you
hard
actually am. This is
classes,
really messed up.
he
You're
may
not
have
supposed
just
to be
been
attractive, Dream. People are
just
gonna be
have
pissed.
become out of
I
touch
can't. This is gonna be
with what a
something.
unit was supposed to represent in that overall curriculum vis-a-vis the ecosystem of units and other courses. So it could be that the material is excellent, but too much, too fast, and that's what the students are complaining about. And it does seem that firing him for student complaints is a failure of being proactive earlier.
And there are weed out classes, as people who went to medical school know, where the rate of passing a grade is very low, or very few students pass those classes. And those weed out classes are structured in a way that they are too fast paced, a heavy material, low on time, and you have to work extra hard or prepare for it ahead of time. Otherwise, you can't pass the class. I remember a class in biochemistry where only 25% of the student passed and rest of the class failed. And the professor's response was, well, this is the readout class. If you cannot handle this, how will you handle medical school? Simple as that. That was the response to people. Well, I passed that class, thankfully, but only because I prepared ahead of time and used other materials and books that were required, but not outwardly expressed. That's where you go for it. So sometimes those are the cases, but in this scenario, I'm not sure the percentage of students who passed this class. If they were able to, some of the students were able to pass the class, and if this was intended to be the readout class for the medical school, then it's not professors fault, because they are supposed to do it. But on the other hand, I'm very surprised at why did not the university took action after the first test results, or these students or the entire university was unaware of his practices. I mean, what's going on? To me, looks like just an excuse to fire him. Based on this limited knowledge that I haven't read the entire article, and something is fishy.
Yeah,
Yep,
I
yep.
just wanted to come on stage and like speak to the fact that it's I don't see it's been brought up, but I think it's important to say that these kids are just coming out of COVID, and the educational parameters for what they have been dealing with outside of being in a lockdown and dealing with that type of educational parameters, especially when it comes to working from home and all of these other things, coming to university and doing such a hard class just such as that, it would be a shock to the system. And I think generally, like, that's one thing that we have to look at, as in some of these students may have been properly prepared if they had proper education, but because we had a strange educational system for the past 2 years, then these students are estranged from this type of intensity. And as everyone knows, like, that's the type of education that we all had to deal with, and these students are dealing with a total different set of parameters.
We
Uh,
got to move.
yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. The next one, oh, I'll share my best. By the way, for anyone who wants to do a deep dive on myself, I'll share my very best secret for how I managed to graduate from UC San Diego with a 3.95 GPA, which is summa cum laude and Pi Beta Kappa as well. And I don't think of myself as anywhere near the top percentile at UC San Diego. My secret was on the first week of classes of each semester, I would attend every possible professor's first class for whatever class I needed to take. So if I needed to take, you know, uh, psychology 101, and there's 10 different professors teaching it, I would go to all 10 classes on the first week. And I did that as soon as I found out that I could, at the end of the class, go and ask the teacher, "Hey, do you mind if I jump into your class? I'm booked in this other professor's, and yours is a better fit for me time schedule wise. Do you mind if I jump into yours?" And in every case, I think I was only one instance where I was not accepted in jumping. And of course, I would go sit through all 5 or 10 or however many there were. And so my first week of classes each semester was like a marathon. I was literally running
Like
from classroom to
market
classroom.
research.
Yeah, and I would go pick the professor that I thought was going to be easiest, and based on the number of papers that needed to be written, etc. And so I wrote very, very, very few papers in university based on that approach that I took,
I
and it
have a
served me.
similar approach.
Yeah,
I look for what you call the amen. You know, as an amen,
no.
a lecturer that usually gives A.
Hey, man.
Okay, so the next, we have a bunch of tweets here. The first is from Tomoko, from Consumer Reports, how TikTok tracks you across the web even if you don't use the app. Digital Agency of Japan used TikTok to promote services. Thanks for them to give our privacy to China officially. Well, interesting story there. How TikTok's tracking you even when you're not using the app. Next is from BB, that Toyota's CEO says California's EV targets will prove rather difficult. Toyota has pushed back against fully electric cars for years as it believes car shoppers don't really want them. Okay. And Eric just found a, a leak of the specs of the new Google Pixel 7 Pro, which will be coming out later this week. And according to this article, the Google 7 Pro will have 6.7-inch display, 120 hertz, LTPO QHD plus display, 48 megapixel telephoto lens, 50 megapixel wide angle lens, 12 gigs of RAM, and the new Google Tensor G2 processor. It has face unlock and fingerprint unlock, and its own security chip. There you go.
So
We'll
I
have to wait
wonder
and
if
see.
that's enough to tempt you over, or if that's
It depends. It totally depends what use cases they can conjure based on that Tensor 2 chip.
yeah. Like I
It,
really
it
enjoyed the Pixel 4 XL, but it just had such shit battery that it made it unusable.
if they're able, I think what's going on now is with Apple and Google, in the Android versus iPhone battle. Apple released, a month ago, the new iPhone 14 Pro Max, what have you. And along with it, they announced some new, what I call super features, which is the crash detection and what was another,
Satellite.
the satellite
Hmm.
connectivity. And I think there was a third.
Also,
And
stabilization emotion. That is a feature, big features.
oh, yeah, the image, super image stabilization, yeah, during video. And thank you, BB. And I feel like those marquee features are the kinds of things that will get people to switch ecosystems, and they're not, the it's not totally, the amount of RAM and the camera quality, all of these things are getting so incredibly close that it's up to the creativity of the teams to come up with some really compelling super features. And so I expect Google will use this new AI sensor, tensor sensor, or whatever the hell it's called, to do something very, very cool with regard to Google Assistant. And if that's true, then I can see how. Well, for example, in their Pixel Buds, they had real time auto translation, right? And that's a cool feature. If you live in a country where you don't speak the language, you just wear your earphones and you can hear what people are saying. And I would love. I'm really curious to see what super feature they enable with this new uh, Tensor Two.
How long have they had that TensorFlow chip in their device? Because that's a whole that introduced a whole new architecture of basically edge AI for them. So is this the first time that they actually? I mean, they announced that that's the first time they put it in their phone.
This is the second gen chip.
I'm sorry, it's a Tensor chip, right? It's supposed to be it's
Yeah,
edge
Second
AI. They could,
generation of a Tensor, generation
they had
2.
they had a Tensor chip either starting two phones ago. This is Tensor Two.
yeah. So historically, I mean, they would have to run to the cloud to do a lot of their stuff, right? I'm just saying that that's you're right, and they need to come up with some specific killer use cases to
Right.
really take it to the much better product managed competitor they have.
Right. So next up, Stephanie found one from Forbes that the Kremlin embraces blockchain currencies, aka Bitcoin, as a workaround to sanctions just months after banning them, just like Iran did. And here's what's so weird about that is this could push Iran and Russia, and let's see what happens with China. If the three of them unite around Bitcoin, wow, shit could get really weird. Although China wouldn't do that, but Russia's going to do that, and Iran's going to do that. So Iran already did it. So anyway, Valerie found one from Reuters, and here's the last one for today. It's about the Flippy 2 robot made by Miso Robotics out of Pasadena, California. And the headline from Reuters says, "Want fries with that? Robot makes French fries faster and better than humans do."
Mm.
Fast food, French fries, and onion rings are going high tech thanks to a company in Southern California. Yeah, well, that company is Miso Robotics out of Pasadena, and you can invest in them. By the way, they allow you to invest in them directly on their website. And this is the Flippy 2 robot that is featured in this Reuters article that, according to the headline, makes French fries and onion rings better and faster than the poorly dressed, lazy, um, overly entitled humans who were previously making your junk food. And how long before?
Tyler,
Yeah,
but Tyler, I worked at McDonald's when I
yeah.
was in high school, right? You're pressing a button. I think
You and
that's quite a
you and Jeff
claim.
Bezos.
What's that? What's
You and Jeff Bezos.
Well, I mean, but right? I mean, like back in the day, lots of people were scouts too, right? Or Cub Scouts or boys, whatever. So I mean, that to me is kind of a little head scratching because especially in fast food, there's not a whole lot you're left to do on your own, really, from a human perspective. The process is you just hit the button, you do this, and I don't know. So I think that's a little bit of a it certainly begs a deeper exploration of that claim. Better French fries. I don't know.
David, you used to push maybe 10 buttons, and right now you only push the buttons for this arm. So,
Well, I think that the argument they would make about better is they'll be more consistent. Likely, there's less room for human error. There's certainly room for robotic error, but I imagine over time the robotic errors will be less than the human errors, and so the
Like the
But
amount of salt they sprinkle over the fries.
okay, that also that provides character, though, man. Humans provide character to your human experience. All this highly automated, regimented stuff. Where's the character, man? Where's the
Where's the
doggone it? They've
texture?
Yeah, the texture of life, everybody. Come on,
well,
and
it's
Well,
about
like
expectation the company gives you. Like McDonald's, you expect the same quality food, but in Starbucks, you expect that they draw some smiley face for you. So it depends on how the brands gives you the expectation. So
So,
in some,
David, I hate to burst your bubble, but I tweeted something out yesterday. I think I put Tech News on. I'm pretty sure I did. About a new automated smoothie maker that I forgot where it's in existence. Actually, I forgot. I mean, the article's on my Twitter account, and it was tweeted to Tech News, but they're calling it Jamba something, and they didn't specify if it's related to the Jamba Juice chain that you and I probably know from California. But I think it probably is, but I'm not 100% sure. But basically, they've got a robot making a smoothie from basically beginning to end, and the only human interaction is something you don't see. They need human beings to like kind of clean up, and they need the human beings to refill like the ingredients that this
Top up.
the robot's going to grab. But basically, the robot's making your smoothie. I mean, so that's the wave of the future.
Ken, you love to bust my bubble, so don't. to burst my bubble. First, second of all, I will tell you all the RFID wannabe market in the the late 2000s, largely did not happen because Target and Walmart finally, through their analysis, were cool with the level of human error. So I hear you. These are great little press releases for companies and things like that, and it is slowly coming, but taking care of your human form bots to do this type of work, it can if you manage them well, you can take care of a lot of that quality.
Yeah, but the faster we increase the minimum wage, I know that that's a sore point with you, but the reality is the faster we increase the minimum wage, the faster you're going to go to automation because at some point the economics come into scale. I actually know a restaurant, more traditional diner in Brooklyn that went out of business a couple of years ago because because of increases in wages and they didn't think they could pass the cost onto their customers and they just shut their doors. And you're going to find that certainly in fast food. There's a price that people won't pay. It's only at the luxury end that people seem completely price insensitive. We have a steakhouse out here that they gold crush your steak or something and they charge you a couple of $1,000. Basically the same steak that you would get without the gold crush wouldn't cost that. But I mean and people pay it, it's the experience or whatever they claim. But in fast food, no, people are just not going to pay more for burgers and fries. There's a point that they just say no, and so I mean, that's why you're going to get more automation.
The really interesting thing on a more general level is that the brands are built often on emotions, especially food brands, and yeah, when you are like McDonald's or something, and so of course behind in the kitchen there's already so much automation and preparation and they are going always to the limit that so much is prepared and easy. And it's interesting for brand managers to think about how automatization and robots you might adapt your brand to it, like you make a feature of it and say it's not a bug, like we are saving a lot of money, but it's a feature, like it's an experience to be there and having the advanced technology. And on the other hand, you can go to the human touch pole of the scale of the continuum. And yeah, it's interesting times because we actually don't know how people accept it or embrace it. And I would say it depends on the branch of industry. Like you don't think about how automated your toothpaste is produced, but you love maybe your bakery because it's all very personal and some people there and going there every week or something like that. And so it's a very mixed situation we are in. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to close it out. Sorry, Tyler. Ken, that's kind of a little bit debatable what you're saying about just how it's going to hit fast food. I think the latest macro, it just requires a deeper analysis, is what I would kind of offer back. The latest macroeconomic numbers are stated that I guess more people are going out to eat food than at the groceries. So that's why there's a whole lot more behind the curtain with regards to really analyzing the impact of wages at fast food. I'll end it there. But I know you like to burst
Right.
my bubble, Ken. It's all good.
Right. But look at traditional retail with Amazon. Amazon's, eating a good piece of the retail pie because they're able to sell stuff cheaper and because they're more automated. So it's the more humans you remove, the lower the cost, and the people will pay, wherever they go. And then in the price sensitive, the lower, I think Ken's right that the lower you go on the price ladder, the more price sensitive they become.
But the
So
prices are not. I'm sorry. The prices are not based on total costing, right? And we're not even without even opening the carbon book or carbon issue, right? So the social cost of we talked about this. If you want to replace a human in these types of manual situations, you're losing a taxpayer. So we, again, the system that
Well,
corporate gets to, the corporate
remember,
power gets to.
the populations are shrinking anyway.
Yeah, I think David, I think I'm not sure about US, but in
Look
Asia,
at Japan.
usually this automation
Japan,
and robots
Japan
are really
tripping over themselves to make robots
yes.
desperately.
Yeah, because of the aging population, they're not able to find people to work, especially the blue collars. So yeah, it's really about helping the society rather than replacing workforce because they can't find the workforce.
Yeah,
Right,
hey,
but
this is
the
Darren.
whole.
I'd love to just chime in just real quick. I think part of the problem here is that we're kind of fixed on a traditional system of socioeconomic measurement, which I believe is getting outdated. So every single time we talk about like an advance in technology, there's always the pushback of like, well, we're going to lose jobs, we're going to this, that, and the third. I think the real problem is we need to take a reevaluation of the value of jobs and start to switch ourselves to a thinking of how can we switch the economic model so that losing jobs is not considered such a scary thing. And that may have to do with taxation, it may have to do with using universal income, it may have to do with some kind of new model where we start thinking, hey, wouldn't it be great to get to a world where no one has to work?
Well, I think work is good, but I think you are completely spot on socioeconomic model because we haven't had nature as a part of that socioeconomic model pretty much ever. So just we should the model needs to be renamed socio-natural economic model, where we incorporate the social costs that are not incorporated in today's price models and the natural costs that are not again incorporated into how we deliver products and services, with air quotes profitably to your customer. I mean, it's going to be a challenge, but it's something that we have to really reconcile with. And with regards to Japan, I understand, but if you take a step back, how many countries around the world, immigration policy is what I would say. Well, let's explore that with different countries around the world. Here we've got this demonization of immigrants that's marketed very well here in the States, and so I think as different countries go through their grain population and that whole rise of the silver boom, I think immigration is absolutely something that everybody needs to look into, Cheryl. But I love Japan. you know,
Yeah, they
I
are
can't wait to
actually,
visit
but
again.
yeah, but of course, every country, including Singapore and Japan, they want the high the higher skilled no, white collars and executives to come in, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think different countries have different issues, but for our side of the world, definitely, we are seeing. I mean, we are thinking of AI and robots and automation more positively than the way you described. So
I think in Asia, most of the countries are not, open to the immigration policy as free as Americans. So that's very hard to recruit new blood as fast as you have.
Okay. So we finished the tweets,
yeah,
and yeah, we'll do it
Ben
again
has
tomorrow.
started his room. So the title today is
Okay, cool.
"Drill Your Way to Self Sovereignty."
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.